once you legalise assisted suicide, you will put pressure on vulnerable people. Vulnerable people will feel like they're a burden to others, and people will be suggesting assisted suicide. Doctors could suggest it. I mean, that's horrific.
After the amendment to the abortion bill, and now today the assisted dying bill being voted on in Parliament, has Britain become a death cult? I'm Emma Trimble, and this is GB News Originals. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel. Now today I'm joined by Tim Diap from the campaign No Way Back and the head of public policy at Christian Concern. Thank you so much for joining us, Tim. Before we jump into discussing the assisted dying bill, let's take a little look at this.
Oh my goodness, no, you are so selfish. I have to be here for her. I did it. I want to be here for her.
I had to give you your life back. There was no other way.
Request for assistance in ending your life has been approved. Basically, you've been.
So that was a clip from the No Way Back campaign against the assisted dying bill. So the question I want to put to you, Tim, is this. Why is the campaign called No Way Back?
Well, it's a nowayback.org.uk. If you want to go and watch it, there's a 3-minute video there. And we're really trying to highlight that, it's a one-way decision, this, isn't it? If you go for suicide, there is no way back after that. And this little video, a short, 3-minute, really powerful video, is just trying to highlight really how once you legalise assisted suicide, you will put pressure on vulnerable people. Vulnerable people will feel like they're a burden to others, and people will be suggesting assisted suicide. Doctors could suggest it. I mean, that's horrific. My wife died of cancer 3 years ago. Obviously, we went to the consultant as frequently as he wanted us to come and follow his every advice. But I can't imagine what it would have been like if her consultant had suggested suicide. Have you considered assisted suicide? And she felt a burden to society because she knew the cost of all the drugs and all of this kind of thing. But fortunately, it wasn't offered, and I'm so glad it wasn't, and she was opposed to it as well. But it's really that pressure on vulnerable people that we're trying to highlight that will come, and the change in the doctor-patient relationship as well through this campaign, and just trying to get as many people as possible to watch it and think again, like, what will it be like to have assisted suicide as part of the law in this country?
So there's been a lot of talk in the papers this morning about how certain Labour MPs may be now turning against the bill, people who'd previously been in support of it. And it seems that one of the reasons for that is that the bill has actually been weakened rather than strengthened with various issues around safeguarding. So what are the concerns specifically about this bill?
Yeah. So there are a number of concerns, Emma. One of them is that doctors can raise it without being prompted, like I just suggested there. One of them is that people with anorexia aren't protected from this bill. One of them is that people with mental illnesses, if they qualify with 6 months to live, aren't protected under this bill. One of them is that Kim Leadbeater, the bill's sponsor, made a big deal of having a High Court judge sign off on every case. That's been watered down to a panel of 3 volunteers who will very likely be volunteers who are in favour of assisted suicide in principle, who will just sign it off. There is no requirement for a coroner to investigate a death by assisted suicide. So in other words, things can be brushed under the carpet and hidden away. Let's say it really was more like euthanasia. The doctor actually sort of, administered the drug himself or herself. That won't be investigated. There are many, many risks and problems with this bill, and it has got worse through committee, not better. And I think a lot of MPs were persuaded. Kim Leadbeater said in the debate in the second reading in November that this is just a vote for it in principle. We could sort out the details later. Not really fair to say that. This is a very significant vote. The second reading votes is, but they should have only voted for it if they liked the bill as it stood then. But anyway, we've now gone through the committee stage, and clearly there have not been strengthened safeguards. If anything, been weakened safeguards. And so this is why a lot of MPs are changing their minds. And it passed by a majority of 55 MPs in November at the second reading. And so what that means is we need about 28 MPs to change their minds over it. According to media today, we've got over 20. And literally there come some coming at the last minute. There were 4 Labour MPs who switched just yesterday on this and wrote to their colleagues saying, please switch. And that's the known people who've switched. So, we will find out in a few hours' time what the actual vote is. A lot depends on who turns up, who abstains. And I'm just praying that it weighs on these MPs' consciences what it will do in terms of changing the law. And, the other thing that really gets to me, Emma, is that, the state will be providing assisted suicide to whoever asks for it. But palliative care is not available to whoever asks for it. How awful is that when you think about it? That will prioritize making sure everyone who has the right to it under this bill will have assisted suicide, but won't prioritize having palliative care for everyone who qualifies for it under this bill. And that's kind of a very disturbing thought in terms of respect for human life and dignity at the end of life.
So it really is on a knife edge, as you were describing there, how few MPs it might take to just push this over the line or not. One of the issues that was raised by people who are critical of this bill is that actually at the committee stage, those discussions and the so-called scrutiny of the bill, or the lack thereof, was very skewed actually in favour of Ledbetter's position. So is that something that, maybe suggests that if this had been properly scrutinised, if this had been discussed in a balanced way, then actually, it wouldn't be such a small margin. And then actually, if those concerns had been discussed in a more rigorous way, that actually this legislation wouldn't pass.
I mean, a lot of people are concerned about the speed with which it's gone through for such an important piece of legislation. If most private members' bill, and this is a private members' bill, they're sort of 1 or 2 sides long. This is, 20 pages or something longer than that. Is way longer than is really meant for a private member's bill, which is meant to make a small adjustment to the law. This is a very significant. It changes the principle of the NHS, which is meant to set up on the basis of healing and helping and caring for people, and they have to add and helping assisted suicide as well. It is fundamental change to the law, and they've had limited time. It's gone through committee. Kim Leadbeater herself selected who was on the committee, and it was biased with people in favour of her bill. And then you've had this report stage, which is where they have the final debate on other amendments, and that's been cut short. And several amendments that have been proposed have not even been able to be discussed, or the proposer hasn't been able to speak to it. And I think this is one thing that is swaying a lot of MPs, that there hasn't been proper debate on this for such a significant change to our legislation. And I hope again that that's weighing on MPs' minds as well. And the other thing is the concerns expressed about this bill from groups like the Royal College of Psychiatrists, saying, well, you've set it up like this so that psychiatrists have to be involved and all this kind of thing, but there aren't enough psychiatrists already for what we ordinarily do. So how are we going to manage this? This is unworkable to make it happen like this. And various other groups, disability groups, and other groups, raising their significant concerns about this bill. If it passes, it automatically comes into effect. There's a kind of what's it called, a sort of automatic clause that says after 4 years, this automatically comes in place. Whether we've got the capability or not, the NHS has to suddenly find the capability to facilitate, as I said, assisted suicide for anyone who asks for it, who qualifies. And that's a very concerning thing as well.
It seems remarkably reckless, given the pressure that the NHS is already under, to have this automatic implementation, even if there aren't enough psychiatrists, even if the resources aren't there to support it. This would surely, common sense just tells you that this is going to end up in people taking their lives who, even if you do believe in assisted dying, you might not think that somebody who, say, has certain mental illnesses or maybe has anorexia. I know there was a story in today's Telegraph about a young woman who had anorexia, would have been more than eligible, according to this bill, but has actually managed to come through the other side and is very happy with her life. Surely this is an unbelievably reckless piece of legislation.
It is, and that's another whole thing, Emma, that people will qualify who really could live for many years potentially beyond what the 6 months is allegedly meant to be. And there are many stories of that kind of thing. My late wife's uncle was diagnosed with 6 months to live back in June last year. He just died this week, actually. So that's kind of 12 months that he lived there, an extra 6 months, if you like. And it's not uncommon for that kind of thing. People live for many years later sometimes. So this idea that 6 months, so you know that it's definitely 6 months, is just false. They don't know. Many doctors have written in, and palliative care people have written in saying, no, you can't trust these diagnoses, and people very often exceed them. So you're cutting short people's lives from what they could have and should have. And I really hope, again, that weighs on MPs' minds. They'll be cutting short lives with this legislation.
What explains that sort of recklessness, the rush to implement legislation that many people already regard as being significantly weakened in terms of its safeguards? So things like amendments being rejected that would have meant that it wasn't possible for medical professionals to raise the possibility of euthanasia with patients, or forcing care homes to carry out euthanasia and if they refuse, risk losing their funding. Things like that have been rejected, that I think the British public would regard as common sense, even if they do agree with euthanasia. What explains the rejection of those safeguards and the rush to implement this in a weakened state?
I think those arguing for it are kind of blind to the arguments, really, and there's a kind of spiritual blindness going on there. I think they're so keen to get this through that they're pushing it as hard as they can. I think that the committee was set up that was biased, and so they just kind of whipped, in a way, the people on the committee to, no, we're going to vote against this one, we're going to vote against this one. I think they wanted it to be as easy as possible to request assisted suicide, and these safeguards they regard as barriers rather than safeguards, if you like. That's the only way I can explain it, Emma. I think it seems extraordinary to me that this is what's happened.
And a lot of the campaigners against this have been disability campaigners, people with disabilities who are concerned that this is going to impact the most vulnerable in society, which is ironic given, of course, the argument that the advocates of the bill are trying to make is that this is actually about dignity. They're arguing actually that this would strip them of their dignity, that this would push vulnerable people to either accept euthanasia or to diminish their lives by creating a culture in which those people who are maybe sick or disabled or at the end of their life feel that they're sort of compelled to do this culturally because they're viewed by society as a burden. How are they squaring those two things, presenting this on the one hand as if it's about human dignity, but they're actually being faced with those critics who are saying, no, actually this is going to undermine our dignity?
I think part of it, Emma, is that people are scared, aren't they? People are scared of death, and scare stories are out there of people, with horrific deaths and that kind of thing. But actually, what palliative care people say is that now we can control pretty much every pain, and you can die peacefully and be sedated if necessary, all of that kind of thing, and that is what happens. And B, people very often who request assisted suicide, like say, please can you help me, even though it's not law today. Change their minds after they experience the care and the medicine and all of that kind of thing, and then say to their doctors, I'm so glad it wasn't legal because I would have missed out on this. I would have missed out on this time with the family, would have missed out with this time with friends and so on. So, the problem is, of course, that, this process will mean that, once it's legalized, people will have it and it will happen. And I like these stories you were just saying of the person in the Telegraph today and so on. They would be dead today when actually they're still alive. And there are lots of stories like that. And I think that the people on this side just don't really recognize that. And the other factor, of course, Emma, is that when it is legalized, suicides go up. General suicides go up. It kind of normalizes suicide in a way. Once the law says, oh, the state will help you commit suicide under certain circumstances, you've sort of said to the society, to the culture, suicide is a way out. It's a valid way out. There's nothing wrong with it. We should all just accept it and move on with it. And that's a horrible thing to be saying. And this is why particularly disability campaign groups are unanimously opposed to this, because they already get people saying to them, if I was in your position, I'd want to end it. I want to top it, And that's a horrible thing to say to anybody. And then when the law backs them up in people saying it, you'll get even more of that. And they'll feel so pressured and burdened and have many more people saying your life isn't worth living. And what an awful thing for anyone to say to anyone.
Well, there was a case. There was a case in Australia, I think it was, with where a woman who had been put on a waiting list to receive care committed herself to euthanasia. I think she did actually go through with it in the end because she couldn't get access to that care soon enough. And we already have these, astronomically long waiting lists in the NHS. And you can easily imagine a situation in which people would have euthanasia because they're not receiving the care that they want. And yet you have advocates of this bill saying that actually this would have a positive effect on palliative care. Rather than taking resources away from palliative care to focus on trying to be able to implement euthanasia within the NHS. What would you say to those people?
Well, there's no requirement of this bill to have more funding for palliative care, and when you do put this through, it's gonna put additional strain on the NHS. It's going to cost more. There's going to be more resources dedicated to helping people commit suicide, put it into the NHS. And where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from somewhere else. And people are going to deprioritize, sadly, I think, probably palliative care. They'll deny it. They'll say, oh, no, we want palliative care, but there's nothing in this bill that requires it. And amendments to say a person must have been offered palliative care or must be able to have palliative care before it's tested were turned down in committee. So I'm sorry, I don't believe them really when they say that that's what it is, or else they're conning themselves.
So this is also coming, of course, after earlier this week we saw the amendment passed that decriminalised abortion all the way up to birth, and this has created an interesting backlash actually from the public, because it's united those who are pro-life and those who are pro-choice, who have become united in their shared disgust at the idea that it wouldn't be illegal for you to effectively murder a baby, abort a baby the day before its due date. And this has led a lot of people to say, alongside the euthanasia debate, our society under Labour is kind of entering into this culture of death. What do you think of the idea that that this is a very fundamental shift away from the kind of Christian foundations of our culture in England and in Britain more broadly towards something far more dark and sinister?
Well, it's kind of a repaganization, I think, really, of our country. Pre-Christianity in the West, thinking back that far, infanticide was common. And widely done, and particularly sex selective, of course. Particularly girls, were left out, exposed. And it was Christians who said, no, you can't do that, and went and adopted those children or cared for them, or went out to the places where they were left and took them in and to their families and so on, and said this is wrong. And it's only because of Christianity that we think infanticide is wrong today in our culture. That's basically the legacy of Christianity, effectively. And the same thing applies to abortion. It's only because of Christianity, really, that we've had laws saying abortion is wrong up until recently. And even there are still some restrictions still, even after this law, if this amendment, passes. It's not law yet, of course, if it goes through. And so I think it's a repaganization, really. This is what happens when you turn away from Christianity. You're going to go to something else. And there's a kind of pagan thing that says, well, children, it's your right. You can decide, it's up to you. They're not really fully human yet. And you can just kill them. And that appalls most people, because we still have that Christian heritage that says, no, babies, you've got to protect them. It's instinctive. You should protect their human life. You should protect them and watch over them. And the law should protect babies in the womb and out of the womb. And as it does out of the womb, and now, if this passes, won't do inside the womb, and being inside the womb will be one of the most dangerous places for you to be, sadly, already is in this country. And we've got some of the worst abortion laws in the whole of Europe already. And this just makes it even worse again. And I think you're right, Emma. Most people around the country were shocked that this happened. It all happened quite quickly. That there's been much more profile about assisted suicide in the media over the last 6 months plus while it's been debated. Not hardly any profile about, an amendment's going to come through to decriminalise abortion right up to birth. And it suddenly sort of came through, and then it passed by a huge majority, like over 200 majority of MPs when they voted on it on Tuesday. And again, people are shocked, like, gosh, even if it passed, I thought it'd be close, but no, it's passed by an absolute huge majority. And so there is a kind of blindness to this, and a kind of astonishing disregard for the value of human life, that all of these MPs, 379 of them, would vote and say, yes, I think we should be allowed to kill babies right up to their birth date. And that's kind of where we've got to. And it is a symptom of abandoning Christianity and abandoning Christian morals. And for that, I blame the church. We've got to teach people and preach the gospel, and the church has failed.
But it seems to be that that sort of abandonment of Christianity and those cultural assumptions in favour of this new, as you say, sort of pagan culture is to do with the political elite, because there is this enormous gulf between the public opinion and the unanimous almost agreement of those in Parliament. So a lot of people who perhaps in favour of both of these pieces of legislation would say that actually the Christian culture is the problem, and that this is liberation. Why shouldn't a liberal society allow people to just do what they want, whether it was respect to their own body in euthanasia, or whether it's respect to the body of an infant, even if that infant can survive outside of the womb. And it's a kind of extreme libertarian position.
Yes.
But they would argue that actually that's progress.
It's not progress. Extreme libertarianism leads to, like I say, kind of paganism. And, the transgender is another aspect of this, isn't it? Where, we've got to have the choice to change gender. We've got to have the choice to be able to do this. And all laws give people, restrict people's choices in some way or other. Even the speed limit says, no, you can't drive above this speed limit in this place at these times. And and stealing is like, no, you don't have the choice to take someone else's stuff. So you have to restrict people's freedoms in some way or other, in any reasonable state that's actually going to have any actual law and order. And you've got to decide when is the right time to do that. And the Christian morality would say these things are clearly wrong, and the law should prohibit them, and the law should say no. And it's a way of teaching the culture what is right and wrong. And it does. Laws change culture. In a sense, the culture leads into laws, but also laws then accelerate that. And once you legislate to allow, let's say, same-sex marriage, for example, then suddenly everyone believes that same-sex marriage is marriage, is real marriage. Well, it's really not. But had the law not changed, most people would still think, no, marriage is between man and woman. And that's kind of the way it is. So it makes a massive difference what these legislators do. And I think there is a gulf between these legislators and liberal elite and the mainstream population. And we're seeing that in the loss of popularity, massive loss of popularity of all the mainstream parties at the moment, and the popularity of reform, just because it's something different, untested, different. Maybe they'll be better because they're different in a way, is I think what a lot of the public are thinking.
In a final word, what do you think the legacy of this government will be, culturally speaking?
Well, gosh, we've only had 1 year, or a bit less than 1 year, haven't we? And, that so much has gone wrong. And, this is the worst change to abortion really for 50 years. If we legislate assisted suicide today, that's a monumental change. And if we carry on like this, there's conversion therapy down the line, there's Islamophobia, there's grooming gangs, all these other things, it will have a massive legacy in terms of shifting away, even more markedly away from Christianity towards a pagan culture.
Tim Dieppe from Christian Concern, thank you so much for your time today. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching.